Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I've got quite a strong voice, but with the microphones, and I should be heard down by Victoria Station quite easily, so that's fantastic. Thank you for inviting me along. I hope what I've got to say to you in the next half hour, with questions at the end of my half hour, is stimulating, enlightening, and educational. So I hope you go away with something from my talk that you didn't know before. I often find personally that when that happens to me, I feel really excited going home thinking I've learned something today. So let me hope I can pass that on to you. Guide Dogs to the Blind Association, been around plus 80 years now, since 1931. And as we all know, in reality, fluffy dogs like Breck to my left are taught to guide blind and partially sighted people and aid with their mobility. But what maybe a lot of you don't know is Guide Dogs also provides a range of mobility services, which I'll come back to in a second, which some of you may feel are advantageous for you to take part in and take advantage of. So we'll come back to that in a second. But in relation to my talk, obviously what I want to do is give you an overview of maybe some of the things that you can do to support you with your travel, make travel a little easier, do some things that will, make you feel a lot more comfortable on your journey. I think for most blind and partially sighted people, and I don't think I speak with many exceptions to this, really find travel very difficult to do. Don't find it easy. There are a lot of things along the way that make it very difficult. Finding out about information, finding out what the right platform is, the right bus, all those sorts of things, I think, without exception, make us all very nervous. So, I think we're all of us here today, hopefully in the same bag in terms of how we find that, and we're obviously looking for solutions to make that whole experience easier. Let me give you the legislation, and I won't go into any depth here, so don't worry, I'm not going to bore you senseless, that in a sense is the backbone to how travel is supported for you and I when we go out and about. So the Equality Act came into force in 2010, and that replaced a lot of other acts and brought all the sort of support that we could expect from providers of facilities, goods and services. And that includes transport providers. So transport providers have an obligation to ensure that they support us with our journey. So that's not only obviously providing the transport to get us there, but providing support at things like stations and onboard trains and the information when we're booking our journey. Then we've got regulation, and we've got regulations like, and again, don't worry about this one too much, 1107/2006, a European regulation to support air travel. And it ensures that things like Breck, as a guide dog, can go on a plane, but doesn't have to be put in the hold anymore, doesn't have to be crated up and sedated, and is useless as a working dog for me for about 4 days when I get to the other end of my journey, but means I can put him on the plane with me straight away, travel to where I need to go, use him as a mobility aid, and at the other end of the journey, get back on an aircraft and come back again, all in the same day, and he's in the cabin of the aircraft with me. So that's just an example of that. And then lastly, technical standards. Technical standards to ensure that there are certain features of things like trains and buses and taxis which are standardized. Now, I don't mean standardized that you get on any train and the seat layout is exactly the same, as for many of us that's a real pain in the backside, isn't it? To think, oh, what's the seat layout going to be like, and am I going to be able to find where I'm going on the train? But to make sure there are things like accessible toilets, that there is support at stations and things like that. So let's think of the practical assistance. So we've looked at, in a sense, the legislation that backs that, and what is that practical assistance? What are the things that you can expect on your journey, or you can ask for on your journey when you're planning to get out and about? So what we're starting to say is think about pre-notification. Now, if you read a lot of the literature that surrounds travel, go to websites if you're able to access websites, read information on information signs. A lot of the agencies now encourage people to pre-notify. So that's basically when you ring up to go on a cruise, you might want to say to the people you're booking with, I'm blind or partially sighted, I may have a guide dog with me, I may need extra assistance, and to be clear about what that extra assistance is you need. Of course, I respect, because I'm in the same position, sometimes you get on a ship or something and you've never been on there before. Your first cruise, never been on a cruise before, so you're going to be not sure what assistance you might need on the cruise. But let them know that you can't see very well, and let them maybe guide you to the sorts of assistance and the sorts of facilities and services they can offer you in supporting your journey. So for example, again, let's use myself and my guide dog Breck here. If I'm going on a cruise ship, I might say I've got a guide dog with me, and they can actually make extra facilities for Breck on the ship. So he gets to use the sauna, and he gets to use the jacuzzi and things like that. So it's really important to be clear about that. Now, I do, again, from many years working in the vision impairment sector, recognise that for a lot of us, we're really scared about admitting that we can't see, because we're worried that people will be very negative or not very helpful. But in the main, actually saying you're blind or partially sighted is actually beneficial. It's really going to help you. Okay, so when we've booked our assistance, we've told the travel operator or the airline or whoever we're travelling and we're blind or partially sighted and established that they'll help us, then we're going to get that personal assistance when we go somewhere. So when we go to an airport, or when we go to some bus stations, or when we go to a train station, again with pre-notification, we can usually, and it's never perfect, so I'm not saying you can step away from here today and suddenly turn up at Victoria and everything will be hunky-dory, but you can usually then expect a person to meet you, guide you to your train, make sure you're in your right seat, and inform people along your journey, if you're changing, going to Victoria to Clapham Junction, getting on a train in Southwest down to Southampton, that there's going to be someone to meet you at Clapham, transfer you to your train to Southampton, and someone to meet you at Southampton and take you to the taxi rank, for example. So those are the sorts of provisions that are to be in place, in a sense, for things like trains. If you're going to an airport, it may be, because I've recently been to Gatwick Airport, they're monstrous places. God knows how anybody finds their way around those places. So of course you're going to need assistance there. So again, the PRM agents, persons with reduced mobility agent, will be able to meet you, guide you maybe even from the bus stop or from the taxi rank or from the car park that you've turned up at, and guide you to where you need to go. Making sure that possibly you're even seated in the aircraft before everybody else. You know, the champagne's in front of you. That may be pushing it too far, but they'll certainly make sure, if you need to be, that you're on the aircraft first, so the staff on the aircraft know where you are and that you're seated comfortably, ready for your journey. And then we may on more sort of on alternative types of journeys, things like bus journeys, expect some support from bus drivers. Now, I'm sure I could ask a number of you who've taken buses and you've asked for support from bus drivers. I'm sure there's going to be numerous people in this room who've had that request refused or the bus driver's forgotten. And for a lot of people we know in guide dogs, that puts them off journeys on buses and they won't do it again. So they end up spending 40 or 50 quid on a taxi journey when they could have spent £2.50 or even used their Freedom Pass or an equivalent pass to travel on a bus journey free of charge. So it's really important that we at Guide Dogs work with the industry and encourage people like bus drivers and taxi drivers to be more supportive. So doing simple things in our advice leaflets to taxi drivers, for example, by saying, don't sit outside the person's door and toot. I don't know if any of you have had that. I can hear cars tooting outside my house any day of the week. And how am I supposed to differentiate that from a taxi that's actually picking me up? So get them to come to the door. Get them to guide you to the car. Make sure that you're not going to whack yourself on the car door as you're getting into the car. Make sure they tell you what the fare is and all those sorts of things. So it's encouraging taxi drivers in that instance to be more talkative and actually sort of communicative, so it actually supports you in your journey. And making sure, obviously, at the other end, that they get out and take you to where you need to go. And then we'll think about help points at places like stations. There are these help points which you may have seen around stations. My stations are round things with two buttons on, and you can press the wrong button and get some irate person at the other end saying, this is the emergency service. Please, can you press the other button and ask for support? So you press the other button, and it's the same person. As has happened to me before now. So those are there to support you, and pressing the button there should then obviously bring assistance for you, get a member of staff to come along and find you, help you with your journey. Same at airports, there are help points there, and then obviously people then can actually do what they can to support you in your journey. And then we're thinking about things like accessible ticketing, so we're making sure that within that journey, if you are going to be taking a journey where you need support with tickets and things like that, that special ticketing systems are there. Now, I'll come back to some technological solutions to that in a second, but it's really making sure that you get support with those things. So, for example, any of you who've travelled up on South West trains today, no, I'm sure other train companies are exactly the same. The ticket machines are great, aren't they? They've improved and made them large print, but I bet they're not perfect, are they? I bet you get a lot of glare from the machine. The colour and contrast is maybe not perfect. It's not easy to see. And those are the things that, again, we need to fight and say these things need to be better. And we maybe need to be thinking of alternative ticketing systems that make it easier for you to buy a ticket, maybe keeping the ticket office open longer. Now, one of the solutions to that is Merseyrail, for example, have now combined the ticket offices with the WH Smiths and the like. So yes, you can go in and buy your Mars bar, get a ticket and actually talk to somebody and get the support you want from that person as you're making your purchases. So information, obviously we've planned to take our journey. We've given whoever we're traveling with pre-notification. We've told them what we need from the journey, where we're going, when we need support, why we need support, letting them know about our vision impairment. And then we want information about that journey, maybe prior to traveling, maybe on the route of the journey. So I'm not suggesting for a moment that any of the solutions I'm just about to talk about suit you as an individual, because I respect that some people may not find some of these things easy, but we're looking at a range of ways in which blind and partially sighted people can help themselves. So websites are the big thing, aren't they, at the moment? And I'm sure some of you have delved into websites and can use websites and really find websites very helpful. There are some people who find them more difficult, and we will obviously work with the travel industry to try and say, if you're going to make websites easier for people to use, make sure that they are all the same. So the layout is the same, the buttons are obvious to people, and they can actually find the information they're looking for. The experience of blind and partially sighted people is that all websites are different. You go to every homepage on a website, and one website will say one thing, one website will say something else, and it's not easy for them to find standard information like special assistance and things. Smartphones. I've got an iPhone. I'm sure some of you in the room here have got iPhones, and they're fantastic things. They can do numerous things, including on my iPhone, for me, I can get my iPhone to talk to me, and it can give me the train times up here today from Guildford. If I get to Victoria Station, I need a taxi. I lack confidence in getting here to the plaza. I can find taxi numbers locally to where I'm stood. If I want to find the next bus, as I did on Thursday, into town, I can look up the next bus and it'll even tell me if it's late. So lots of information on smartphones that you can use to your advantage in getting out and about. Telephone is a traditional thing, which again we encourage service providers to keep thinking about, making sure there are telephone services, a number that you can ring that doesn't cost a fortune. And as well, some of us experience, I expect flying and things, an 0901 number is not ideal if you want special assistance. You want to ring a number that provides information for you, and you can spend an hour talking to the service provider, give them your information without it costing you an arm and a leg. Large print, which I suspect for some of you in the room here is advantageous. Again, if you're booking support, booking journeys, and you want the information, ask for it in large print. Don't be frightened of doing that. Don't be frightened of saying, I want this in a format that I can read. Real-time information systems. I've just mentioned the bus timetable thing that I can look on my iPhone, and it tells me what bus I want, and it tells me if the bus is late or on time. Well, those real-time information systems are popping up everywhere. You may have seen screens in stations that give you information. They're tied into a website that tells you what platform you need to be on for your train. Tied into smartphone apps that tell you when your next train is coming. There's a lot of information out there now that's being tied up, and there's a lot of technology out there that will be advantageous to us in the future and make travel easier. I'm not saying it's perfect, and I'm not saying it's for everybody, but it's certainly out there. And certainly on things like bus stops, there's information now about when the next bus is coming. So you stand there, certainly somewhere around here, you can look at some of the bus stops that say the next bus is in 2 minutes' time. So those are some of the methods that you could use to get out and about and how you can actually plan your journey. And it's important to talk to service providers, local authorities, to other groups, and we'll come back to some of those in a second, about your needs and where they don't work. One of the things that we do on behalf of blind and partially sighted people at Guide Dogs is we have blind and partially sighted people come to us and say, I had a problem on a bus. I was on an Arriva bus the other day, and they decided to change the stand without telling anybody. And all the driver needed to do was step outside the cab and shout that number 32 is going from stand 19 instead of stand 20, but he didn't. So sometimes it's up to us as an organisation to go to those operators like Arriva and say, this is the way you could improve your services to support blind and partially sighted people. So campaigning is the way that Guide Dogs and the Royal National Institute of the Blind and other organisations go about doing this, representing the interests of blind and partially sighted people, making sure that your voice is heard. So if you're a member of the RNIB, you're a member of Guide Dogs, and you want your voice to be heard, get involved and support us with these things, because it's only your experiences that can help us support you. So we've got Talking Buses, which is a current guide dog campaign in London here. All the buses talk to you. They may tell you things you don't want to know, especially if you've got on the wrong bus. But if you're on the right bus, it'll tell you where you're going and what the next stop is. We're looking for those systems to be implemented in bus services around the country, making sure that anybody gets on a bus anywhere, and you can guarantee not only can you see the visual screen at the front of the bus, but the bus will talk to you and tell you where you're going. And this will then mitigate your need then to worry about whether the driver is going to tell you you've reached the hospital or not, more often not. Quiet vehicles. I don't know if anybody's seen electric vehicles around the place now. And they're fantastic, and you know, they're said to be energy saving. Well, that's another debate for another day. But the point is that they're quiet, especially at low speeds, and some of those vehicles, when they run under 20 miles per hour, the combustion engine stops, the electric motor kicks in, and they're near, if not silent, especially in, say, an environment like outside here, outside the plaza. So what we're asking for is electronic systems to be put on those electric vehicles to replicate the sound of an engine. Now, some of you may say, but what about, reducing the noise in the environment? Don't disagree with that, but we can actually be sympathetic to that, invent synthesized sounds for vehicles that are quieter than the combustion engine, but can be heard at twice the distance. And also remember, with your loss of sight, maybe your sight is deteriorating, maybe your hearing's not as good as it was, of course you may feel vulnerable crossing the road. So anything we can do to support you crossing the road and make sure that you're safe, and even if you don't hear a vehicle, you know it's there, is all to the good. And shared streets, again, another big campaigning thing from guide dogs. We now have a lot of these streets, don't we, with cafes in them and very nice planters around, but no curb to delineate the carriageway from the pathway. Fantastic, really nice. I love those. I think they're a fantastic thing. But of course, how do I tell Breck where to keep on the path and where to avoid traffic? So we need to be talking to local authorities and councils and saying, do it, but be considerate of blind and partially sighted people and other groups, and make sure that there are ways of delineating the carriageway from drivers and making sure that we're all safe and sound. And the way we do that is, as I said before, people like Guide Dogs, the Royal National Institute of the Blind, other people have all got together, signed up to these campaigning issues, and will challenge people like the Department for Transport, Transport for London, other major groups in actually asking for their support. We also then, at a local level, would recommend that you get involved with your local society. Many of you are members, obviously, of the Macular Disease Society, but why not get involved with the local society for the blind and partially sighted people in your local county? And they're often doing campaigning at a local level, because, of course, there may be things that are going on in Norfolk that don't relate to Surrey, and vice versa. So it's worth getting involved at a local level. And in access groups, in your local town, there's often an access group. It's representative of the interests of older and disabled people, and actually will draw together the information that those people experience about the town. My town, Guildford, is going under major renovation at some point, and it's up to the access group to feed into that and say what the concerns of disabled and older people are in relation to the plans that they've got afoot. So let's then explore how guide dogs can help you with that. Guide Dogs has changed recently in its structure. I wouldn't worry too much about how that structure has changed in terms of what I do on a daily basis. But what it means for Guide Dogs is that we have now what are called mobility teams. Mobility teams are in your local area. I'd say they're regional more than local, so there's not one in every town. And their job is to support the mobility of blind and partially sighted people. Now, it's not just, as I said right back at the start of my talk, it's not just guide dog owners we're supporting. We are supporting anybody who is blind or partially sighted or has a need related to their sight. So if you have a question, you have a concern, you do need support with your mobility, getting out and about, leaving the front door, having the confidence to walk down the road, having the confidence to take public transport, need some support with that. Guide Dogs is there to support you with those processes. So if you do have a concern and a need, please go to the Guide Dog information, which is on the Guide Dog website, or ring direct inquiries for the main Guide Dogs number, and you can be put through to one of the mobility teams for your area, and they will be able to provide the support and assistance you need. And they're there to help all blind and partially sighted people, as I said again, not just blind people. So don't be under the impression, because it's got blind in the title, that it's just blind people who can be supported. They can support with access issues. So again, if you're frightened of going to the local authority, or you're not confident about, say, a bush that's overhanging your neighbour's garden and you don't feel confident about going to your neighbour because they've got a reputation for behaving like a Rottweiler, go to guide dogs and get guide dogs to support you with that. Because again, getting issues like that supported and getting their help can make a big difference to your mobility. Can mean the difference between you getting out and about or staying at home and fretting about it. Support with the built environment. You know, sometimes going to a city like London, obviously the majority of you got here alone. I suspect some people got some support doing that. But it's not easy, is it? It's quite difficult. It's quite challenging. I suspect there's very few people in this room who just strolled along without a care in the world and didn't really think about what potentially the environment might bring to them at the other end. Again, guide dogs can support you with that, give you some clues and tips and ideas to support yourself. Travel and transport, again, obviously it's my role to support travel and transport related issues at a national level, but then I can disseminate that information to our mobility teams and provide them with advice and guidance as to how they can better support blind and partially sighted people. So for example, just one example of that, there's a new Marine Act coming in at the end of this year to support, or better support, disabled passengers on ships, boats and hovercraft. So again, I'll be writing up the guidance document and passing that on to the mobility team so they can support you. If you ring up and say, oh, I'm just thinking of going for a trip on a cruise, what sort of support and advice can you give me? And mobility, important. Mobility, yes, it may be that it's someone like myself with a guide dog who needs mobility training and support to make sure that Breck's not going to walk me in front of a vehicle or slam me into a lamppost. But it can be the basic idea of maybe you learning how to get out confidently by yourself. It may be learning how to use a symbol cane. It may be how can you better use any aids and assistance you've got to better help you on your journey. And one of the examples of that, we run something called the My Guide service. So if you feel like, oh, I want to go to the town by myself, I want to do my shopping by myself, but I don't quite have the confidence to do that yet, My Guide can help by providing you with a volunteer, agreed a set period of time, for that volunteer then to support you with the journey, planning the journey, how you go about it safely, and then obviously bringing you to the point where you actually can feel independent and go out and do that journey for yourself. And then obviously once we've got beyond that point and we feel more confident, what are some of the things we can do to help ourselves? Well, I'm taking these from my stance as a blind person, but I don't think that then eliminates them from partially sighted people in the room here. So let's go for a few of these. Ask for help, that's really important. I guarantee, I can put my hand on my heart and say sometimes I'm frightened for asking for help, for what sort of response or lack of response I might get. But it's really important if you need help, either from a professional, providing you with a service, or from a member of the public sat next to you, do ask. It's better that you ask and get some support from somebody, rather than not ask and then suffer and really find it difficult to get out and about. Preparation before travel is really important, making sure you have planned your journey, thought about where you want to go, how you're going to do it. Maybe for someone like myself who's blind, that's planning the route, thinking about what roads I'm going to be taking and how I'm going to do that. Getting support with mobility, if you're not confident about that, you really want to do it, but you're not confident about doing it for yourself, get some support with mobility. Go and ask guide dogs for some support or your local authority for support and get someone to come out and help you with that. Because, again, macular degeneration is something that happens to us over a period of time. It's not something necessarily for all of us that happens overnight. And maybe over time we suddenly realise that things are not as easy to see as they used to be. Getting out and about is not as easy as it used to be, so we might need some support in doing that. And using mobility aids and techniques. If a rehabilitation or mobility officer offers you a symbol cane, do use it. You may think to yourself, I don't want to draw attention to myself. I don't want people to see that I'm blind or partially sighted. But there's a good reason for that. If you bump into somebody and you've got a symbol cane on you, they're going to be a lot more forgiving to you than if you didn't carry one with you. If you're not sure, is that a lamppost in front of me? I'm not really quite sure about that. Put the symbol cane out and tap it, and then you'll know for good, or it could be just a shadow there, so you're not quite sure, so use the symbol cane. So if you're provided with these aids, do use them because they are really advantageous. And then Travel Buddy My Guide. Take advantage of the Travel Buddy services that guide dogs offer. The My Guide service, Action for Blind People offer a service, certainly in the Midlands. Take advantage of those because they can actually really make a difference to your independence. And they don't last forever. You know, 6 months down the road, you could be here today thinking, I don't know what to do. 6 months' time, feeling very confident about getting out and about alone. And familiarisation is the last tip. It is really, with all of those, familiarising yourself with the journey, what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, what support you're going to get with that journey, and making sure that you feel confident when you've stepped outside your front door that you can do that confidently, either alone or with assistance. So just some ideas. Hopefully I've given you something you can go away with today and actually take with you and maybe think about your next journey in a different way, how you're going to do it, who you're going to get the support with. So I hope that talk has helped you in some way. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John.